December 22, 2009. Antarctica is the coldest, most desolate, and mysterious continent in the world. Today, a Basler BT-67 tourism aircraft was flying from the Union Glacier camp. There were 36 people on board, 32 tourists, 2 experienced pilots, and 2 guides. They all shared one dream: to experience a memorable flight under the icy skies of Antarctica. The aircraft was piloted by Captain Ahmed Rashid, a former military pilot with over 20 years of experience in these frozen skies. It was 2 p.m., and since the sun shines 24 hours a day in Antarctica, a white sheet of ice stretched for miles in every direction. The flight path was to take a spectacular loop over the Ellsworth Mountains and Antarctica's highest peak, Vinson Massif. Flying at an altitude of approximately 2,500 meters and a speed of 380 kilometers per hour, the plane through the air. Everything was normal, but nature had its own plans. 92 minutes into the flight, at 3:32 p.m., the aircraft suddenly struck an invisible enemy: Antarctica's notorious katabatic winds. This was a storm of icy air sliding off the plateau at speeds of 200 kilometers per hour. Supercooled water droplets, liquid water below freezing temperatures, instantly froze onto the plane's wings and propellers. The biggest problem arose when ice jammed the pitot tubes. These sensors provide the aircraft speed, and the readings in the cockpit became incorrect. The autopilot system failed. Captain Ahmed Rashid took manual control, but it was already too late. A powerful gust of wind pushed the aircraft down like a toy. At 3:38 p.m., the out-of-control plane crashed into a mountain in the Heritage Range. A deafening explosion occurred, followed by a deathly silence. When Captain Ahmed Rashid regained consciousness, his head was bleeding, and the wreckage of the plane lay scattered everywhere. The cockpit was completely destroyed. Somehow extracting himself, the captain looked around. The plane had broken into 2 pieces. Luck was on their side, however, as the plane had slid down a thick layer of snow after hitting the mountain, which reduced the force of the impact. One by one, people began to wake up. Screams, pain, and sounds of fear echoed through the air. The captain called out, "Be brave, have courage, we are alive." Hearing this, people felt a glimmer of hope. The first task was to take a head count. 1, 2, 3, a total of 36. Everyone was alive. It was nothing short of a miracle. Though many had broken bones, severe injuries, they realized they were trapped in one of the most dangerous places on Earth, surrounded by icy mountains, deep glaciers, and a deathly silence. No one knew where they were. A rescue team would likely never find them, because the storm had blown them 200 kilometers off course. Furthermore, the plane's emergency transmitter had been destroyed in the crash. Keeping their spirits up, they spent the first 24 hours creating a temporary shelter from the wreckage to protect themselves from the freezing winds. They had only 15 days' worth of food for 36 people. In Antarctica, from December to May, the sun shines for 24 hours, which completely disrupted their sleep cycles. The captain decided that if they were to escape, they had to do it during these 6 months of light. Otherwise, the 6 months of dark night would swallow them alive. On the second day, they divided the tasks. 4 teams of 2 were sent in different directions to see if anything was visible in the distance. One team to hunt for food, while others cared for the injured and reinforced the shelter. A 25-year-old engineer in the group tried desperately to fix the broken radio using the plane's battery and wires, but thin layers of ice inside the radio had permanently damaged it. However, he did manage to build a small heater, which provided some relief from the cold. By evening, all teams returned empty-handed and dejected. There was nothing but snow everywhere. The hunting team had barely caught 1 small fish. As days passed and 5 days went by without any sign of rescue, people's patience to wear thin. Infighting broke out. A group of 5 people argued that staying there to die was foolish and that they should leave on foot. Captain Ahmed Rashid tried to explain that leaving without information would be suicide, but they wouldn't listen. Taking some food and supplies, they set off. They had made the biggest mistake of their lives, heading in a direction where the nearest research center was over 1,000 kilometers away. 10 days had passed, and the food was nearly gone. Hunger grew so intense that people tried boiling the leather from the airplane seats to eat, while unsuccessfully trying to quench their thirst by sucking on snowballs. The scene was enough to make anyone's skin crawl. On the 20th day, what everyone feared most happened. An elderly woman was gripped by hypothermia and pneumonia. They had no medicine, and everyone watched helplessly as the elderly woman suffered before she passed away right in front of them. This first death shook the survivors to their core, making them confront their own mortality. Meanwhile, the rescue operation was searching in the wrong location, because the plane was much further away than anyone imagined. After 20 days of failing to find them, the mission was called off. An official report was issued stating that the plane was buried under the ice and all 36 passengers were dead. Families began mourning while the survivors were still fighting for their lives. By the 25th day, the food was completely gone, and the struggle for survival turned even more desperate. Survivors used sharp tools made from plane wreckage to hunt. Sometimes they found small fish and occasionally a large seal, which would lead to fights over the meat. Humanity was slowly fading when another disaster struck. A terrifying Antarctic storm with winds of 300 kilometers per hour that lasted for 5 days. Their shelter made of plane debris blew away like a house of cards, forcing them to dig pits in the ice to hide. For 5 hellish days, they lay in those pits listening to each other's screams of hunger. At one point, the intensity of their starvation even led them to think about eating one another. When the storm finally stopped after 5 days, they emerged with frozen hands, faces, and ears. Fortunately, they found a large to eat, which saved their lives and gave them the resolve that staying put meant certain death. The captain called a meeting and decided they would spend 10 days gathering food before setting out to find a human settlement. On the 40th day, a team of 31 people began their journey, carrying bags and a sled made of wreckage loaded with 15 days' worth of seal meat. However, they made the same mistake as the first group and headed in the wrong direction. By the 41st day, they were battling snow that was knee-deep. On the 45th day, another blizzard forced them into ice pits for 2 days. When it cleared, they discovered 4 of their companions had been buried alive. Only 27 remained. Shortly after, they discovered the bodies of 2 people from the original group of 5 floating near a massive glacier. On the 50th day, they saw something in the distance. They appeared standing there and ran toward them with joy. These were the remaining 3 people who had been separated from them, but their joy soon turned into fear. Those 3 had been stuck there for a week because they were facing a massive 15-foot wide crevice, a chasm that seemed to have no end. Crossing it felt impossible. The guide had a rope and decided to use it to cross. First, the guide secured one end of the rope on their side and threw the other end with a hook toward the chasm. As he moved forward on the rope, the hook slipped and the guide fell into the chasm screaming. Everyone was stunned. After a long time, the second guide gathered courage and threw the rope to the other side, pulling it several times to ensure it was secure, and then slowly reached the other side while hanging from it. There, he tied the rope more firmly and began calling everyone one by one. This continued for 2 to 3 hours. Every person, trembling while gripping the rope tightly and looking down at the chasm of death, moved forward slowly. A tiny mistake meant certain death. That day, they saw death very closely. It was the 65th day, and food had completely run out once again. Their bodies no longer had the strength to walk. Just then, they spotted some penguins on the glacier. They were so helpless with hunger that they hunted the penguins and were forced to eat their raw meat to stay alive. It was a painful sight that shamed what remained of their humanity. They were merely living corpses who wanted to breathe at any cost. They continued walking. Today marked 35 days of walking and 75 days since the accident. In these 75 days, they had witnessed scenes of death that no one could even imagine. The plane crash, watching die, eating boiled leather, surviving 5 days of stormy torment, and now eating raw meat. On the 75th day, the notorious screaming winds of Antarctica began to blow. Moving at a speed of 200 kilometers per hour, chunks of ice were hitting their bodies like bullets. They took refuge in an ice cave and waited for the storm to stop. Every passing day was breaking both their courage and their bodies. It was the 80th day, and they had covered about 200 kilometers. They felt they were on the right path that would lead them to a research center 1,000 kilometers away. However, They didn't realize that just 300 to 400 kilometers from their crash site, there was another research center they were walking away from. They had made the wrong decision, and now they had to travel an additional 800 kilometers. In this manner, 150 days passed, 6 months were complete. The sun set in the sky for the final time. Darkness spread everywhere as Antarctica's 6-month-long polar night began. They now had to move forward in this absolute darkness, which severely worsened their mental state. On the 170th day, many developed scurvy due to vitamin deficiency. Their gums began to bleed, teeth loosened, and wounds appeared on their bodies that simply would not heal. On the 200th day, the youngest member of the team, an 18-year-old girl, passed away due to scurvy. Her death broke everyone's spirit from within. By the 230th day, the lack of food and mental pressure had turned the survivors into animals. Darkness, hunger, and disease were slowly consuming them. As 350 days passed and all hope had faded, they witnessed a miracle in the sky. The aurora australis, or southern lights. Lights of green, blue, and violet danced across the sky. For the first time in months, they felt that some beauty still remained in the world. On the 420th day, Captain Ahmed Rashid, who had been leading everyone, fell seriously ill. His body began to rot due to frostbite. A former mountain climber named Kanji seized the opportunity to take command. Kanji was a harsh and ruthless man, and his decisions split the team into 2 groups. On the 470th day, following Kanji's advice to take a dangerous shortcut, they were caught in a blizzard. While no one died, they became hopelessly lost. By the 500th day, one member developed gangrene in fingers damaged by frostbite. To stop the infection from spreading, Captain Rashid heated a rusty knife and amputated the fingers. On the 530th day, a final confrontation occurred between Kanji and Rashid over control of the team. Most members trusted Rashid's humanity. Left alone, Kanji left the team in anger and took a different path. His ultimate fate remains unknown. By now, they were merely skeletons, with no strength left to walk. On the 560th day, they saw an animal for the first time, a skua bird which signaled they might be near the ocean. Dead hope was reborn. On the 565th day, they spotted a small black speck. Whether it was reality or an illusion, the speck gradually grew larger. They realized it was a human figure. An electric surge of life ran through their lifeless bodies. This was the moment they completed their impossible 1,000-kilometer journey. At the sight of that speck, the agony of 571 days flashed before their eyes. From the first day, the plane crashed to that final moment of hope. Starving and desperate, they had resorted to eating the plane's leather upholstery. They remembered the 5-day storm where they were buried alive under the snow and watched their friends freeze to death. They recalled crossing the chasm of death by rope, eating raw meat to survive, and Sam's silent sacrifice. They lived through the darkness of a 6-month polar night, watched their bodies rot from scurvy, and saw a comrade lose his mind and leap into the abyss. Having lost more than 20 companions one by one, the memories flashed before their eyes like a film. On the 571st day, they used their last remaining strength to move toward a distant structure. Along the way, 2 more individuals succumbed to hunger and exhaustion. Finally, on the 572nd day, 13 near-dead survivors, looking like walking skeletons, collapsed at the doorstep of Esperanza, an Argentine research base in Antarctica. When the base scientists opened the door, they were as shocked as if they had seen ghosts. Following their rescue and medical treatment, they learned they had been declared dead only 20 days after the initial crash. The news of their return stunned the entire world. This remains one of the greatest and most harrowing survival stories in human history. Even after returning home, they could never fully escape the trauma of that experience. Captain Ahmed Rashid was honored with his country's highest civilian award for his leadership. Later, a book titled 572 Days of Ice and Hope, written by the famous author John Kirk, detailed their incredible bravery. This story continues to teach us that in the face of a human's will to live, even death must often admit defeat. If you felt moved by this story and their pain, do offer a salute to their courage in the comments.